Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm really looking forward to some sunshine here. We're still a little gray. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's see if we can make my screen change. There we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about the noxious weed listing process, just real quickly, and the weed classifications for Washington State. And then we'll move into some priority weed species. And then I did throw in some species that aren't necessarily high priority, but ones that we tend to forget about, and we want to make sure we still have them in our purview to be looking for. So to start with, let's talk about the noxious weed listing process. So the Washington State Noxious Weed Board every year annually votes on the noxious weed list that goes into effect in the following January. That process is a kind of a year-long process. Anybody can submit noxious weed proposals up and through the end of April. So from January 1st through the end of April, anybody can submit a proposal. And those proposals can be things to add to the noxious weed list, things to take off of the noxious weed list, or things to change, like maybe change something from a Class B to a Class C, or Class B to an A, or a designation, something of that nature. And those proposals can come from landowners, they can come from agencies, they can come from anybody. And then our Washington State Noxious Weed Control Noxious Weed Committee reviews those proposals, and they rank them, and they go through all the information about them, and then they make a recommendation to the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board. And then in November, the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board holds a hearing. Anybody can come in and testify on those proposals, give additional information. And then the State Noxious Weed Board will vote on those proposals at their following Noxious Weed Board meeting in November. After they vote, then that goes into effect January 1st with those changes that they have approved. And then your county noxious weed boards have 90 days to approve their own county noxious weed list. And those county noxious weed lists contain all of the Class A noxious weeds, all of the Class B designated noxious weeds by the state for control, and then they can select other Class B and Class C noxious weeds. So let's talk a little bit about those classifications and what they look like. So Class A noxious weeds are ones that are very limited in distribution throughout the whole state. Sometimes not even found in the state yet, but maybe they're in Oregon or Idaho, things that we really want to get on top of. We want to eradicate them. We do not want them to get loose in Washington State. Here's a picture of kudzu. We don't have any in Washington State. If it showed up here, we want to be able to eradicate it immediately. So it would be on the noxious or the Class A noxious weed list. Class B noxious weeds are ones that are not widespread in one part of the state, but not in the other. So this is an example, Scotch broom, where we have a lot in Western Washington, but very limited in Eastern Washington. So what's on the Class B list? And now the State Noxious Weed Board has designated it for control in Eastern Washington because there's not a lot in Eastern Washington. So if it pops up there, we want to be able to jump on it, eradicate it, make sure that it is required control in Eastern Washington and just get rid of it. Whereas it's so widespread in Western Washington, it's just really not economically feasible to require most landowners to eradicate it. However, some counties have selected it for control, or in certain parts of the county, they can select it for control where it is not as widely distributed. Here's a good picture of the distribution of the Scotch broom to help kind of see the difference between Eastern and Western Washington. And then we have Class C noxious weeds, which are ones that are very widespread throughout the whole state. St. John's wort is one that we see in Eastern Washington and Western Washington. The State Noxious Weed Board does not designate Class Cs for control. However, county noxious weed boards can select them for control and say, hey, we have it very limited in distribution in this area of our county, or maybe the whole county in some instances, and they will select those for control. And that oftentimes helps for funding, to get funding to treat those noxious weeds, or sometimes allows people to treat them in riparian zones, whereas you're not allowed to treat other plants in riparian zones, things like that. So having them on the noxious weed list can be beneficial when you're looking at a landscape restoration or something of that nature. And then we do have our monitor list. And our monitor list are species that we want to gather more information about. There's no required control of these species, although oftentimes we do recommend that you control them or don't plant them. But they're things that we really don't know a lot about, and we want to get more information, find out if they are truly an invasive species or something we might put on there that really never does much, and we'll take it back off the monitor list. But we do want to gather that information, see if there's any research out there about it in other states or even other countries, find out really what's going on with these plants before we make a decision or add them to the noxious weed list. So I do want to go through a couple of priority species, things that we've added recently. One of them is this Turkish thistle. It was originally thought that it was Italian thistle, and then researcher John Gaskin identified it as a different species in 2019. It is definitely a different plant than Italian thistle. It is an annual thistle, which is kind of different. I'm used to most thistles being biannual or maybe a short-lived perennial. But this one is an annual thistle. It has little winged stems. It can grow up to 4 feet tall. And then it has heads are usually single or clustered loosely. You can kind of see this picture of the 3 that are kind of there. It's usually fairly short stemmed. So we don't know of any populations in Washington State as of yet. However, there are populations in Northeast Oregon. We're not sure how it got there, although it does spread by wind, water, and animals. It does not appear to be being grazed. Animals don't typically graze on this. It's not palatable to them. There are some plants that are being treated with different herbicides. They're trying to figure out really what is working well on it. And we have seen a little bit more along the Snake River. So it is surrounding Washington State, but we really haven't had any major infestations here yet. This is one that was added to the Class A noxious weed list in the last couple of years. And it's one that we really want to get on top of if it does show up here. There's another good picture of it. And you can see that it is kind of a tall, spindly thistle. It's not what you think of when you think of like Scotch thistle or bull thistle. It's not a real robust thistle. It is a very small, slender, although it can grow again to that 4 feet height. It's more dainty. Another species that was added recently is hanging sedge. It is native to Europe and Northwest Africa. It is an evergreen perennial clumping sedge, so it makes these big clumps. It likes riparian zones, kind of wetter areas. It has tall spreading stems. It can get up to 6 feet tall. And that's pretty tall for a sedge. It has these long drooping, can I put my little arrow over there? I can. The long drooping spikes. I think that's where it gets its name, hanging sedge, but I'm not sure. Again, it likes those riparian zones. It can produce up to 20,000 seeds per plant. It likes partial shade. And it was originally planted ornamentally. A lot of our noxious weed species were ornamental plants that have escaped into our wild areas or riparian areas, things like that. Oftentimes, especially in metropolitan areas, we have people that are dumping plants out that they no longer want, sometimes in those green spaces. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because those are oftentimes where those ornamentals get distributed and then they take over those green spaces. So if you have plants, don't dump them out there. There are a number of locations in King County, and they are finding more and more as they survey more for this hanging sedge. It is found in southern BC and Oregon. It's noted as being tough to eradicate, partly because it is a sedge and it's not susceptible to broadleaf herbicides. But yeah, it is another one that is coming in from both sides of us, and we want to make sure we get on top of it if you do see it. And any of these, if you ever have any questions about identification, if you see something you're just not sure about, feel free to send us pictures or email us, and we can help get those identifications and find out if it's really a noxious weed or if it's a native plant, something of that nature. Ravenna grass. This is one that was added a little while back. It is a tall grass. It kind of reminds me of pampas grass. However, the seed heads aren't as showy as the pampas grass. It was an ornamental grass that again escaped, getting up to 13 feet tall. The leaves on the stems have this inflorescence, which is kind of cool. You can see the picture up there in the top. This is one of the identifying markers. The basal leaves can reach to 3 to 4 feet long. They're about 1 inch wide. And this is a clumping grass. You won't just see like a whole field of it. Well, you might, but it'll be in clumps rather than individual plants growing. I did include salt cedar in my presentation today. It's not necessarily a high priority. However, it's one of those ones that we don't talk about a lot. And I want to remind people that there are some priority, or there are some noxious weeds out there that we still want to control or eradicate, or at least maintain, make sure they're not getting, their infestations are not spreading. So salt cedar is a spreading shrub. It's a small tree, 5 to 20 feet tall. So it can grow real small and kind of outspread, or it can get real tall, either way. The flowers are pale pink to white. Leaves are small and alternate, and they're scale-like. So it has that look like a juniper kind of, or something of that nature. It spreads by seed. It resprouts vigorously from roots if the top portion is damaged or removed. So that's something to keep in mind. If you are controlling salt cedar and you cut it, it can resprout from those roots. It does like moist soils too.
Mary, 4 minutes.
Oh, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So giant hogweed, this is another Class A noxious weed species. It is one that we see primarily in Western Washington. It has a sap in it that can cause burns to your skin, especially if those are exposed to sunlight. This is an interesting plant in that it is not a biannual or perennial. It has a 4-year life cycle where it has a rosette the first 3 years, and then at that 4th year, it'll put up these great big stems and flowers and go to seed. So you have ultimately 3 years to control it before it really goes to seed. So we really want people to get on top of it and make sure that you eradicate it. Again, that sap can cause burns, especially when the skin is exposed to sunlight after it's been touched with that sap. Here's some pictures to let you know really how big this gets. The leaves are very lobed, a very large plant. It has these purple splotches on the stems. There you go. That's a pretty big infestation of the hogweed. Hogweed is very easy to control. You can dig it out. You can use herbicides. It's susceptible to most herbicides, 2,4-D, triclopyr, even glyphosate works on hogweed. Poison hemlock is another plant that is on one of the high priorities in Washington State, mainly due to the fact that it's poisonous. It can poison animals, people. We do have every now and then somebody thinks that it's wild carrot and tries to eat it and gets poisoned, either to the hospital or whatever. But poison hemlock has the same similar purple splotches as the giant hogweed, although poison hemlock has smooth stems, whereas giant hogweed has more hairs or stickers on the stems. Poison hemlock flowers are in umbels also, but they're more sparse and spread out than the giant hogweed. And the leaves to the poison hemlock are more feather-like, almost ferny.
Mary, just about 1.5 minutes left.
All right, thank you. There's several different herbicides that work on poison hemlock, glyphosate, the 2,4-Ds, triclopyr. If you're handling either one, giant hogweed or poison hemlock, you should wear your PPE. Make sure you're wearing gloves, goggles, things like that, eye protection, if you're removing either one. I would like to just super quick, if I can get there. We do have a lot of knapweeds throughout Washington State, both in Eastern and Western Washington. So I just wanted you guys to see the pictures of the knapweeds. This first knapweed is spotted knapweed, and you can see the spots on the bracts of the knapweed. The second one is diffuse knapweed, and diffuse knapweed has more just spiny bracts. And then the third is Russian knapweed, and it's very smooth. And then the pictures below kind of show the growth patterns of the knapweeds. Just something to keep in mind, knapweeds can be allelopathic. They can put chemicals into the soil and deter other plants from growing. So anyhow, I'll end there. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me or Send us pictures if you would like help with IDing anything. And I have my email. There we go. Yeah, if you ever need any help IDing any plants or anything, feel free to send pictures to us and we can help you with some noxious weed ID. All right.